Okay, folks, it's time to get into my review of Overmind, your one-stop shop for uncomplicated adventure. Overmind is the brainchild of writer John Delarose and artist Miz Krimson, and I've gone and reviewed some of John Delarose's earlier work, which I thought he had published originally as webcomics. It turns out that's not the case. These were actually all comic books that were later translated into a webcomic format. Now, I've seen it go in the opposite direction as well, from webcomics to actual comic books, and I thought that is what had happened here, but it turns out it's not the case. He actually published the comic volumes first, and then they were translated into a webcomic format. So just be advised of that if you choose to watch this video, because I didn't know that at the time. But I did come away with a generally favorable view of his writing, and I was encouraged to look at his more recent stuff. His most recent stuff is a series called The Terran Imperium, and it starts with Overmind. This is volume 1. And it actually weaves in and out of some prose novels, and then back into comics, and then back into prose. So I'll be having to do a substantial amount of reading to catch myself up. But for the first issue, Overmind, it takes the place of a 4-part comic series that has been collected into one volume and published as a complete graphic novel. And John Delarose himself has spoken highly of it as it's science fiction. So people who like Star Wars will love this book, and it would make a great replacement property for people looking for change from Disney's disaster. And I'm just thinking to myself, oh my god, if you really want to put a high bar on your property, a high standard for it to meet, yeah, just go right for Star Wars, or right for something like Star Wars or Star Trek. Even Disney's Star Wars, you've still got a lot of fandom who think highly of the property, at least, even if not of the most recent offerings by Disney. So, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna come for the king, you better not miss. And unfortunately, the misses kind of start right on page 1. Not with the first sentence, though. Why is it the simple missions never go as planned? I was actually very impressed with this sentence, and it kind of put me in a frame of mind thinking, I wonder if I'm dealing with a force to be reckoned with here, because one of the things that you got to, or that you ought to do as a writer, is put the theme of your book up front. And this is a very thematic statement, which made me think, oh, well, maybe he's got his act together here. And I would have continued to think that were it not for the fact that he goes straight into an info dump, which is one of the worst things you can deliver. My name is Ayla Rin, Special Agent for Terra Prime. The Imperium sends me to do the dirty work the fleet can't handle. Joris, my handler, told me this would be easy. The objective was to break into the NES Starliner's offices, download communications logs, and slip out undetected. Yeah, I actually do see a parallel between this and Star Wars. Unfortunately, the parallel is the opening scroll of The Phantom Menace, which is one of the biggest snooze fests that Lucas ever delivered. Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes into outlying star systems is in dispute. Hoping to resolve the matter with a blockade of deadly battleships, the greedy Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to the small planet of Naboo, while the Congress of the Republic endlessly debates this alarming chain of events. The Supreme Chancellor has secret. It's like that. Now, the artwork has its problems, too. I came to this page thinking to myself, is this woman, half rat? Because there's something about her that just screams like she's got a mouse face. And I could not for the life of me figure out what it was until I realized that her teeth are overdrawn. And I wouldn't even know that if it wasn't for a video by Ethan Van Sciver recently, in which he was doing a head sketch of Heather Swain, and he was talking about how some comic book artists have a tendency to overdo the teeth. And this is definitely one of those cases. If you were to actually look at someone and see what teeth they have on display from this angle, it'd probably be something more like this. And it actually makes a difference when you put that picture back on to Ayla Rin's neck over there, and she looks a lot less than the half human, half rodent I first took her to be. Now, this whole portion is kind of a study in confusion, and the one thing that makes it that, especially, is the fact that this border between the first and second panels in this particular segment of the page is not respected at all. In fact, the border is so sloppily drawn that it actually looks like this guy is shooting a laser out of his elbow. Um, oh my god. Yeah, you need to clean that up and not have the panel breaking for one thing and have the border be solidly delineated. So this is what preferentially you would have done. Another issue is lack of a third path. There's 3 lasers firing on the page, but there's only 2 sound effects, so we need a third path up there. And then this particular caption is too high on the page. It's overlapping between the first and third panels, which is going to lead the reader's eye from the top of the first panel down to the bottom of the first panel, and put our reading order in the wrong sequence. So you want to move that box down, and then your reading sequence will be reestablished in the correct order. Now on this page, we have more of the offensive panel breaking, and this is a technique that can work, but often does not work. And it doesn't work on this page because her running toward a window is not nearly as exciting as her crashing through a window. So if you were going to make anything the key element on the page that would be raised in panel breaking, it would be her breaking through the window. As it is, just chop off what you need to, rearrange the captions, and make it a distinct panel in its own right, so that it can be just easily read by the reader. Anytime you're engaged in stuff like this, where you're either going away from square panels, you're doing panel layering like you see here, or you had the panel breaking that we saw before, you are making it harder for the reader to interpret what it is you're doing. This is a splash page, so of course we won't find any panel breaking or panel layering here. What we will find, however, is an overabundance of speed lines. Not only has she got the speed lines depicting her as swooping up into the sky, but it also looks like the way her arm has the speed lines. She's lifting her arm from at her side up into that raised position at super speed or at a very fast speed, which really isn't what's happening here. I would have gotten rid of a lot of those speed lines. Moreover, this box I would have moved lower on the page, and the reason being is that it's really hard to see this orange on top of the orange of the explosions. That's just making the reader's eyes do some extra work there. And also, what is this even doing there? Special Agent Ayla Wren fights to defend Terra Prime. I know that already. You told me that already in these particular captions. And this isn't this isn't the only time that happens either. When we come to this scene between Ayla and her boss, and they're going over the results of the mission, here's what we get. Welcome back, Agent Wren. Did you enjoy your tour of the NES Space Yard's corporate office? Ha ha, very funny. You didn't tell me Rabeni pirates would be involved. I had no idea. Intelligence reported NES to have dubious contacts, and we needed to obtain more details by retrieving recordings of their transmissions. Hence the mission. Okay, you told me all this already. That's pretty much all contained in these 2 particular boxes from the previous pages. If you were going to go ahead and tell me this all at this point, then I would say go back to the previous pages and write something else. Write something that gives us like some insight into Ayla Wren's character, something that gives us her unique perspective on her mission, something besides just giving us the same info dump twice. Now we find out that from the logs that she has recovered from the shipyards, there is a Project Overmind, which the locals are using to create rebellion. And she goes to the planet where Project Overmind is, finds out that there is this Ethernet connecting all the citizenry there, and she enters the Ethernet to find this Overmind is this computer artificial intelligence saying the individual is a threat that cannot be assimilated. It must be eradicated. And when it attacks her, she and demands her fealty, she says, "I'm sorry, I only serve the Emperor." And that's interesting because one thing that this book does, which I wasn't expecting, is that it kind of flips the script on the whole idea of empire bad, rebellion good. Now we have a different mechanic in play, which is rebellion bad, empire good. Or at least we think so from the fact that she's the protagonist. Although that does have a tendency in our minds to kind of color her as maybe not a protagonist or maybe an anti-hero as such, being somebody who is subservient to an emperor, since that's not how we're generally wired to think, especially if you're an American comic book reader, as thinking this is a good kind of power structure. It is kind of intriguing that she is the person who is on the side of the Empire, whereas the people with whom she will be fighting, including this Overmind, are the ones running the rebellion. After her first encounter with Overmind, she goes to the governor's office, and she's given a room and says, "Why don't you relax here? Governor Julius informs me through the Overmind that he'll join you for dinner." "Why, thank you." She's creeped out by the fact that everybody's telepathically linked. And in the next panel, the very next panel, we see Ayla joining him for dinner. What the hell happened in between these two panels that there needed to be a delay between these two panels? I mean, generally, if you leave us in a certain location and there's going to be a set period of time, why would you not have something happening in that set period of time? And instead of basically putting in this gap that slows your story down. There's no reason why he couldn't have just been leading her through this room into the next room to see the governor right away. If the governor wanted to join her for dinner and was already in the process of having dinner, maybe this is the governor's meeting room and beyond that is his dining room, and he just takes her through the one room and right into the other. There's no reason for a delay. It's like ISOM #1 when you have the book beginning 2 weeks earlier with the reappearance of Yaira in Florispark, and then it picks up 2 weeks later when you have Avery meeting the title character ISOM meeting Yaira in Florispark, and we are never, not in ISOM #1, not in ISOM #2, not in Yaira #1, ever told why there is a 2-week delay. I don't care if there's even a 2-hour delay here or a 20-minute delay here. What happened during that delay? If there's nothing there to pack into that delay, don't have a delay. The remainder of the book's setup is pretty much what you'd expect. She finds the scientist who's in charge of the project, and he says, "My wife and kids have been captured. I have to do what the Overmind says." And she wants to know what the end game is. He's not really sure what the end game is, but he does know basically how to stop the Overmind, and so she has to do that. Anything more would pretty much be spoilers, so I'm not going to tell more about plot of what happens in the book. I will go over, however, a couple of pages, however, where I think I saw some flaws that tripped me up. One of them being where she's paffing a couple of thugs, and it's obvious that the way we're supposed to be reading this panel flow is from the top panel to the bottom, to the left bottom, and then on the right hand side you've got a couple of panels 3 and 4. The problem is that when you hit this dialogue balloon, that stops the reader to read that right away, and so you want to make sure that the reader is not interrupted by the natural flow of the eyes. And part of the reason this happens, by the way, is the fact that you've got this overlapping panel layering instead of making distinct panels. Generally speaking, if you have distinct panels where the borders are clearly seen, and especially if you have square borders, then you don't have that kind of confusion. So whenever possible, don't feel obligated to do all this panel breaking here and overlapping panels and all of that garbage. I've been going through the Avengers comic from like way back in the 1960s, and most of the stuff that they do is just one square rectangular panel after another, and it all works. So don't feel like you have to be flashy in order to tell the story, and telling the story is always the most important thing. So, same thing happens here. We have, clearly this is the direction in which the dialogue is supposed to be read, or the captions are supposed to be read, but that leaves all of this artwork here to be ignored by the reader practically, because the reader's eyes have already been taken into future panels. Uh, what you really want is for the reader to enjoy the first panel and then go back up to the top. And one way you could do that is to move one of the captions on the right-hand side down into into the leftmost panel. And for God's sake, don't have this last panel overlap on the first one when none of the other panels do. There's no need for that. Keep the panels distinct. So, overall pros and cons of the book. Pros: for one thing, the story is solid and direct. There's no diversions and there's no loose ends. I mean, this is a general point A to point B story. You're not going to get caught up in side paths. There's not going to be branching plot lines that don't come back together correctly. You're going to get a single storyline from A to B, and holding your attention all the way throughout. The art satisfies all the basic storytelling requirements, despite some of the bells and whistles that the artist put on that get distracting. You do get a good story told, and it's in a sci-fi campy style, reminiscent of Flash Gordon. I think John Delarose actually compared it with Mike Baron and Steve Rude's Nexus, and I would have to agree. It does have that same kind of feel to it. It flips the script in making the Empire the good guy and the Rebellion the bad guy. I mean, that's not something that we're used to, and it's actually refreshing to see a kind of a change in paradigm like this. And there are some unexpected impressive moments. I didn't show any here because they would be spoilers, but you do get a couple of moments in the book where you're like, oh, that was really well done, or you get kind of a nice little emotional kick from them. And like I've said in a previous video about Ethan Van Sciver's writing, sometimes if you are the kind of writer who can provide those one or two really good, jarring hook moments, then you can attract repeat readers. You'll have fans instead of just one-offs. Now, on the con side, the story has many opportunities to explore deeper themes, yet it delves into none of them. I mean, this is a shallow story. This is not something that's going for any kind of depth whatsoever. You will be a rock skipping over a pond, and even if you know that there's all this marine life underneath you, you will not be examining any of it. You don't even snorkel down to it. This is, you've got all these kinds of different themes, like individual versus the collective. Of course, there's also the Empire versus Rebellion theme going on. You could have, Ayla Rin's character factoring into this story in some way, as opposed to her being just a kind of a James Bond insert. There's just so much that could have been explored in this book that was not. And the art is full of the usual overreaches, the panel layering, the panel breaking that hinders storytelling. If you want a good video exploring how to do panel breaking in a good way, I would suggest my video, The Erratic Guide to Panel Breaking, and that'll show you some examples, but it's something that should be really done sparingly. Otherwise, you just want to have distinct panels with all of the action contained within each panel, so that the reader can go from panel to panel to panel to panel without having his eyes slide all over the place on account of not being able to follow where the train of action is going. The world building arrives late and is partly unreliable, and by that I'm talking about the fact that she is living in an empire that she serves. We do hear the term Imperium, but I don't know if people would naturally connect that with Empire. What we would kind of think is that it is like some kind of galactic organization, but we wouldn't have any idea of what it is in terms of, how it connects to anything. And even if it was an Imperium or an Empire, the fact that there is an Emperor is something that we can't just naturally intuit from from the word imperium or empire. An empire having an emperor, not always the case. You could have a senate. I think for most of the Roman Empire's existence, you had a senate over it. But I mean, maybe in that case it was a republic, and then it became an empire when Julius Caesar took hold. Not really clear on that, and I don't think most other people would be either. So that's part of what arrives late in the book, and also the news flashes that are in the book about how the emperor is in disrepute, or how people are not happy with the emperor's handling of the empire. That's another thing that we actually have to question, because when this planet is receiving news, it's receiving it through the Ethernet, which is under the control of this Overmind, and it makes you wonder, is this real news or is this fake news? And that's another one of the deeper themes that could have been explored. What do you do when your entire planet is controlled by fake news? But we never get anything like that. And then character development. There is none. I mean, there is just no character development whatsoever. I mean, Ayla Rin is the same person going into the book as she is coming out of the book. And despite the fact that she is taken into a virtual world where individuality, especially hers, is supposed to be stamped out. Well, what does it mean to try and stamp individuality out of Ayla Rin? What is it that makes her cling to her individuality? What is it in her upbringing? What is it in her training? You know, there's all sorts of things that could have been brought to light, so that even if she didn't change from beginning to end of the story, at least we would have been able to see something inside of her that we didn't see before. But she's just kind of a James Bond cookie cutter, and that's pretty much all we get. So, it's science fiction, so people who like Star Wars will love this book, and it will make a great replacement property for people looking for change from Disney's disaster. And I can just imagine Kathleen Kennedy laughing and saying, "Wookie, please." Because the thing about Star Wars is how much depth it has. Star Wars and George Lucas's properties explore very, very deep themes. I mean, he's going into the hero mythology, he's going into the hero's journey, he's going into all of the kinds of stuff that I mean, I would love for Jordan Peterson to get a hold of George Lucas's films and then do an expose of those. I mean, you know, forget about the creation stories in the Bible, Jordan. We need a Jordan Peterson commentary on Star Wars. All right. And then you can tell us why the prequels and the sequels suck, or maybe the prequels are good after all. We just never saw it. I don't know. I don't care. I'd just love to see Jordan Peterson talk about Star Wars for a while. But in any case, yeah, this is not on the same level as Star Wars. Star Wars has depth. Hell, even The Acolyte had depth. It was not a good show. It was predictable as hell and boring as hell, but it had depth, and that's what this book lacks. And because of that, I can only give Overmind on the overall scoreboard a 5.5. And the 0.5 that I added on there is largely due to those memorable moments in the book that I was talking about earlier, where it was like, oh, okay, that was done particularly well. Minus those, I think I probably would have given a 5.0. But, you know, they were there and they deserve credit where credit's due. So that is why I call Overmind your one-stop shop for uncomplicated adventure. It is an adventure. You will be carried along. You'll even have a couple of great moments during it. But it is not deep. It is not. It's shallow pickings. And hopefully, as I go through his later volumes in the Terran Imperium, both the prose and the other comic, which I will review later, I hope to find more depth. Thank you for watching. I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. And by the way, my issues of Horseman have arrived. That's right. I got my one for reading and my one to tear up for scan, so I've got to get started on that. So be on the lookout. Do subscribe so that you will be notified when my review of Horseman by Chuck Dixon and Joe Bennett for the Rippaverse comes in. Again, I'm Mike Partika. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you later.